Hi, I'm Lisa Dutton Cooper with AARP Michigan, and I'm delighted to invite you and welcome you to today's program, Women in Brain Health, It's Time to Act. Thank you for being part of this. This is a live program, so as we go along, be free to put your questions, any comments you may have in the comment section right below this window. And then later on in the hour, we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. And now, to get started, I'd like to turn things over to Paula Cunningham, State Director of AARP Michigan.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you so much, Lisa, for the outstanding work that you have led for the state of Michigan and for our AARP office in brain health. This has been such a passion of yours, and it has benefited all of us and everyone who's come in contact with you, as well as our almost 1.3 million members here in Michigan. So we appreciate your work and your leadership on this. And we are so excited to have present to you with you today or to you today a phenomenal panel of experts who to talk about women and brain health. And this panel is, if you had to pay money for this, you probably couldn't afford it. They have so much knowledge and wisdom and expertise to share with you. So very much appreciate you being here with us today. So first, let's just introduce our panel and tell you a little bit about who they are. And this area of brain health is something that is not new to Michigan. We've talked about this for a number of years in our Disrupt Disparities report and also in our Disrupt Disparities report 2.0. And you, ARP Michigan, you have told us that this is the number one priority on your mind in terms of your own health and well being. So, to talk about brain health today, we have Sarah Locke. Sarah Locke is the executive director of the Global Council on Brain Health, and she is also, and we're so fortunate to have her as our senior vice president for policy and brain health at AARP. She has just a very impressive background. Sarah, we're so happy to have you with us. But she has been involved with Research International Affairs, or PRI, where she leads ARP's policy initiatives. And we want to get policy changes also, not just what we can do, but also on the federal level, what policies need to be changed. Initiatives on brain health and care for people living with dementia. She serves as executive director of the Global Council on Brain Health. And that is a phenomenal organization. I just learned a little bit more about it earlier. They just do some incredible work with experts from all over the world. And she is a member of the American Society on Aging, the National Academy of Social Insurance, the Gerontological Society of America. She serves on the steering committee for the National Research Summit on Care, Services, and Supports for Persons with Dementia and their caregivers. She is also a cognitive health technical expert advisory board member, and she's on the Dementia Friendly American National Council. She is on the Health and Aging Family Policy Fellow Program National Advisory Board member, and she formerly served as commissioner for the American Bar Association's Commission on Law and Aging. I could use a whole program talking about her credentials and her background. She is incredible, and we're so happy to have you with us here today, Sarah. Thank you for being here. And we also have Dr. Kate Zong, who is a doctor, a medical doctor. And Dr. Zong is a geriatric psychiatrist, pharmacologist, brain health advocate, and founding member of the ARP Global Council on Brain Health. Wow. She is a pharmacologist, psychiatrist, brain health advocate, and founding member of this phenomenal organization. She is an adjunct professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, founder of the Brain Innovation Initiative, and CEO of CNS Innovations LLC, which is a company that is dedicated to providing innovative consultation services to advance prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Zong has served as Chief Strategy Officer for Global Alzheimer's Platform, a foundation devoted to improving and accelerating clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease prior to joining GAP or GAP. She has also been a scientific consultant for multiple pharmaceutical and biotech companies in the United States, Canada, and Asia. She received her medical degree from West China University of Medical Sciences, and she earned her master's degree in pharmacology and completed her residency care in psychiatry at the University of Toronto. She is a fellow of Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Canada. And we have her right here to answer your questions and to talk with each of you about brain health. And then Next, we have Dr. Laura Eschker, who is the Managing Director of Wellness Initiative at the University of Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center. Yes, she's from the University of Michigan, but it's okay. She's phenomenal. Help all you Michigan State fans that are out there. She moved by family experience with long-term illness and memory loss. She is since 2012, she was led the Wellness Initiative at the University of Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center, where she designs, implements, and evaluates well-being and self-care programming for family caregivers. We don't ever want to forget about the caregivers. She was the first director of Michigan's Medicine Silver Club Memory Loss Program prior to serving as a clinical manager for the early stage initiative at the Los Angeles Regional Alzheimer's Association. Laura has advanced professional training in mindfulness based on interventions and holds professional certifications in aging, dementia, and contemplative clinical care. She is the lead teacher of the co-creator of the MBDC professional training program for clinicians nationally and around the world. She received her master's degree from the University of Michigan School of Law Work in 1997. Usually I don't read an entire bio from folks. I usually refer them to the webpage. But you women, and I'm just going to say, you chicks in charge, you are so impressive that we're just thrilled to have all of you here. And I thought the audience needed to know that this is not something that any of you do as a sideline or as something that you're interested in. This, you live and breathe and work in this area all the time. So before we get started with your presentations, if you could just each of you, one at a time, and let's just start with you, Sarah, tell the audience one thing that you'd like for them to take away from this presentation today.
The one thing, and Paula, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me for this incredibly important topic to so many people. AARP is ramping up our efforts to help women and families who face the challenge of dementia by reducing risk, improving care and treatment, and sparking hope for the future of a cure. And we need people to join with us in those efforts.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Dr. Kate Zone, what's the one thing that you'd like for people to take away?
It's time to act now. That's the key message. We have come a long way on our understanding of the disease, on the advancement for research. Yesterday, we had the first vaccine for COVID approved in the world. And that's such a significant milestone. There's so much we can learn from that. It only takes them less than a year for them to develop vaccine. And now there is a prevention for COVID. There's so much we can do for Alzheimer's. So it's time to act right now. Get involved.
I like it. Let's not continue to talk about it, but let's do something and be about it. Thank you. And Dr. Eschker? I'm sorry, you're not doctor, but
I'm not. I'm
looking at your resume. You might as well be. They just haven't given you the title yet. But
thanks, Paula. Hi, everybody. So well-being and self-care are certainly a sensitive and important topic right now for all of us. Moving after what Dr. Zhang has said about COVID and the developments in the vaccine. So whether you're a care partner or not here today, I hope you'll leave here with something valuable for yourself. So I'm passionate about health and well-being for dementia family caregivers. And my deepest hope in my work is to normalize and to help facilitate what real, imperfect, yet sustainable pathways for well-being can look like for a caregiver through the many years they navigate the challenges of dementia. And I'm inspired by the caregivers that I work with, and I'm eager to share today a few things, 3 helpful approaches and 1 simple practice that makes a difference in their lives, and certainly in my own on a daily basis.
It's so important. Sometimes you forget about the person taking care of the individual that has the dementia or some kind of cognitive decline, and need to take care of themselves as well. So let's get at it. We've got some great information, some wonderful expertise here. So let's start with Sarah. Sarah, you understand you have a presentation. You're going to be talking about things to act. Women. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. I'm going to start with a very exciting video about the challenge of women in dementia. and AARP's commitment to solve this urgent problem with everybody's help. What you'll see is from a Zoom event earlier this spring that AARP did with the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, the organization founded by Maria Shriver to tackle Alzheimer's. Brain health researchers and policy experts from around the world joined us in this 2-year collaboration. And Dr. Zong, who you'll be hearing from shortly, has been with us from the beginning. At this virtual event, we unveiled a new report called It's Time to Act, which provides a roadmap for change. It was timed very deliberately because the science is evolving, but also this year happens to be the 100th anniversary of women having the right to vote. And 10 years since Maria Shriver, AARP, and the Alzheimer's Association released a report showing the challenges of dementia for women, that women are 2/3 of the people living with the disease and 2/3 of the caregivers, and why it was such an urgent challenge. We've made some progress, but further progress needs to be had. And this plan, which we'll talk about more in depth, is a 10-year roadmap for change. So after we did this event, we surveyed participants and asked them what they thought was the most urgent thing that needed to be done and that they could help with. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But as I mentioned earlier, AARP is ramping up its efforts, and I wanted to share this short video with you so you could be part of the broader collaboration.
At AARP, we recognize we simply can't sit back and wait for a cure for Alzheimer's disease and dementia. We need to reduce the risk and improve care, as well as support innovative research. But we know that no one organization or researcher can do it alone. We need to tap into everyone's strength and also make a call for women to take ownership of their own brain health, to empower women to stay brain healthy. Science has shown that we can all do a great deal to promote our own brain health. To ensure that research is inclusive, researchers must learn why dementia affects so many women and underserved communities. All family caregivers should have access to training and local services that help them provide dementia care. And they should have paid leave and health care benefits. Healthcare providers must do a better job of addressing, spotting, and treating cognitive decline in older women.
Our brains are different, our hormones are different, and the way we manage stress and just about everything else is different. So much about us is different, but unfortunately, very little is known about us as we age because women have not been a part of research. Why is there so little help for people who are dealing with this disease? Why aren't there more social workers? Why aren't there more geriatric psychiatrists? Why aren't there more doctors in this disease? Why aren't there more caregivers? Why? I'm so excited that we have a roadmap. I'm so excited that we have put numbers and that we have come together to create a status report that the nation can learn from and that can clearly see where we are and where we want to go if we go there together.
What we would like to know are things like, what are the molecular mechanisms that underlie differences in risk factors? What is the influence of menopause and hormonal therapy? What's the influence of behavior and social factors on Alzheimer's disease risk in one sex versus another? How do these differences manifest themselves across different racial and ethnic groups?
As this remarkable collaboration demonstrates, we can come together and drive collective action on behalf of women everywhere, reducing both the stigma and the risk of cognitive decline. Women need to know they're not alone. The stakes are high, but we have an opportunity now to help women on their journey to better brain health. It's time to act.
Thanks for your patience with that video. It's a big file, so it takes a little while to upload, but I thought it was super important to share just the level of commitment that we have at the federal level and at the state level to driving change in this area. And if we could show the next slide, women's brain health, 1 in 5 women above the age of 45 will develop Alzheimer's in their lifetime, contrasting to just 1 in 10 men. So we have double the risk. Women in their 60s have twice the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease than they do breast cancer. And who knew that? It's the second leading cause of death for women 85 and older after heart disease. And so we know we can do things about it. Next, and that's what the report addresses, and we'll make sure that you can get it if you want more facts and statistics, but I'm going to try to go quickly because we've got so many great speakers and want to get to your questions. So by 2050, an estimated 13.8 million Americans will be living with dementia, and many more will be affected as caregivers. 9 million of those people living with dementia are going to be women. This century, death from Alzheimer's has increased 145%, and this disproportionate burden on women is felt throughout all regions of the world. So Dr. Zong is going to talk more about the science behind the differences in women and why and what we're finding out now. But I wanted to tell you that there is a whole lot of different efforts underway that we need research in, whether it's how hormones or genetics or even the physical anatomy of your brain or how many children you've had or haven't. All of these things are starting to show that they are making a difference in people's brain health and particularly in women. Next slide, please. It's not just the biology either. It is the social determinants of health, and risk factors disproportionately impact women in different ways. You heard Maria Shriver talk about how women handle and process stress. Caregiving is a perfect example, and you'll hear more about that later. But the levels of stress that women have in their lives and lower levels of physical activity because they're not taking care of themselves, because either they are more vulnerable due to lower income, education, other kinds of things that have happened through them, to them through their lives, have a significant impact, whether it's the type of work that they do or the fact that women are prone to have greater bouts of depression. These have significant impacts on brain health and on the disease. And we're finding that we need to look more towards the social determinants of health than just the biology. Let's turn to the next slide. We have to end the neglect on women's health research. Things are getting better. Paula talked a little bit about policy change and why it's so important. Fairly recently, policy changes at the federal level to try to assure more women are participating in clinical trials has started to change the scientific evidence we've been able to collect. But unless women participate in those trials, we'll not find out the answers that we so desperately need. So we're on the path to success. 52% of participants in the National Institutes of Health clinical trials are women, and that's because laws were changed at the federal level requiring that drug companies and any companies receiving federal funding enroll women in their trials. We have to do the same thing with older women and particularly women of color, because not only are we challenged as women to participate and have higher rates of dementia, But we also, if we are African American or Hispanics, have significantly greater risk. And we're finding out more and more it's those social determinants of health rather than the biological differences. But if we don't get people in those trials that are as diverse as our nation, whether it's age, gender, or race, we're not going to get the answers we need. So hopefully we're going to be not only looking at those biological questions, but as I mentioned, African American women are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's than white women, and Hispanic women are 1.5 times. And it's things like educational level, because what you do in your young life can significantly affect what you do in your older life. And so it's that lifespan approach, and in both research and in taking care of ourselves so that we enter our older years in better shape, that's critically important. So things like access to support services, professional opportunities, nutrition, even location of residence can influence your risk, causing disparity among groups. One of the examples that I like to point out is when we were gathering the Global Council on Brain Health, and we had sleep experts from all over the world talking about sleep. There's significant issues around, for example, urban communities, where if there's constant light coming into windows or sirens or noise, that can be very disruptive of people's sleep patterns. So the location of residence can make a big difference. Now, if you know about it, you can try to take steps to adjust for wherever you live, getting out in nature, participating in parks, those kinds of things. But it just goes to show that socioeconomic risk factors and those that particularly disadvantage women, because if they're more vulnerable due to lower economic conditions, then they are facing additional challenges. Next slide, please. Fortunately, we have Laura Eskinger, who is a fantastic social worker experienced in this particular area, who's actually created programs to address these problems. And she's going to tell us more about this. But remember, we were talking about how women may have lower economic capacity or resources. And oftentimes it's because they are the caregivers in their family, and they are twice as likely as men to have to move in full time with the people they are providing care. And they may reduce their hours at work or quit altogether in order to become the caregivers for their family. They don't think of themselves as caregivers and aren't thinking about taking care of their own needs because they're worried about their loved ones. But that's the perfect time for caregivers to start paying attention to their own brain health, because they start to notice and can pay attention and focus on what they can do for themselves as well as their loved ones. And both will be better off, both the person living with dementia and the caregiver. Now let's look at this next slide, because this is where I'm going to be talking about our 5-step plan to address women's brain health. And we want you to take a look at it and think about what are the things that you can do in your personal life to address these issues. Eliminating stigma is a big deal. People are afraid to go to their doctor and ask and demand for health care in this area. People don't think about your brain health like you think about your body parts, but you need to start thinking about your brain health and know that there are things you can do both to empower yourself to be brain healthy and address dementia. So fighting the urge to hide when you might be embarrassed by your memory or your cognitive function, try to fight that and realize there are resources out there to help you, and you've got to go get them. So don't worry about it. Don't think about it as something that's embarrassing, but something that you can do something about. We mentioned the importance of ensuring inclusive research, and I think Dr. Zong will talk a little bit more about that. The importance of supporting caregivers. If they quit their job and do not have healthcare benefits or work in low-wage employment that doesn't pay for paid leave, how are they going to financially take care of themselves and their loved one? You know, caregivers are the backbone of our long-term care system. And if they don't get taken care of, if they themselves don't have paid time off and healthcare benefits, then they're going to be in bad shape and in worse shape when they reach their older years. So we've got to support caregivers and improve the training of healthcare providers. For so long, we've known that we don't have a pill, a cure for Alzheimer's. No matter what they tell you, whether it's a brain health supplement, we unfortunately don't have a pill that can cure the disease. But if healthcare providers are attuned to the latest science and are paying attention, they can encourage these improvements in healthy healthy lifestyles that can make a difference, not only if you have the disease and improving your quality of life, but actually reducing your risk so that you don't get there. And do you know that if we can delay incidence of dementia by just 5 years, we will cut the incidence all across this country in half? We could save billions of dollars if we were able to do that. So that's the plan. I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to share 2 other slides and then come to the conclusion, because I want to share, if we can go to the next slide, this collaborators' priorities. We are hoping that we can begin to count on the listeners to join us as a collaborator. But it depended on the question we asked, what they thought was most important. When we asked people what action did they think would help vulnerable and underserved women the most when dealing with the challenges of dementia, they said inclusive research was the most important thing we could do right now, but closely followed by empowering women to promote their own brain health. And what could we do most quickly? How could we make change happen the fastest? There, people all agreed, or mostly agreed. 43% of our collaborators said, let's empower women now with knowing what those 6 pillars of brain health are so that they can make a difference in their life right now. But when we said, what could we do that would result in the biggest improvement, it was tied between research and empowering women. So this is giving us a pretty good roadmap of how we should proceed. All of these 5 things are important, but we're going to be focusing on empowering women and making sure we have inclusive research. So if you would go to my conclusion, we can wrap up and you can get to the other great presenters who have so much great information to share. So change is possible. We've seen it, but it's just beginning. We want you to have the information personally that you can have to improve your own brain health. So I encourage you to go to aarp.org/brain health. That's an easy way to remember it. But if you want to get to the Global Council on Brain Health and its specific report on women, here's the website. And we're asking you to join us. Together, we can achieve substantial change for women's brain health, improving and saving lives right now, but we need everybody to pull together. So thank you, and I turn it back over to Paula.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This a ray of hope for everybody. You know, so many times you hear about brain health and you think of doom and gloom and there's nothing that we can do, but we all have a role to play in this, and very much appreciate that information. So please take note of those websites. We've got lots of questions in the chat, and Lisa Cooper will be out in just a moment a few minutes to respond to some of those questions or ask your questions. So keep them coming, keep the questions coming in the chat box. But next we want to hear from Dr. Kate Zong. And she also has a presentation on the science behind gender disparities in dementia and brain health. Dr. Zong, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you very much, Paula. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me. It's really my great pleasure to be here. As a founding member for AARP Global Council on Brain Health, and also as an AARP member, as a woman, I'm particularly passionate about women's brain health. If I can just go to the next slide, please. You have heard Sarah talked about some statistics, some data, and some socioeconomic and policy issues affecting women and brain health. In the next few minutes, I will share with you some of the science behind the gender disparity in dementia and brain health, particularly affecting women. Thanks to AARP and many other organizations, and thanks to all of you to support and to participate, we have made great stride in the last 10 years, and particularly in the last few years, understanding the differences from the biology, social, economic, and among a host of factors. Next slide, please. As you have heard over and over again, women are at higher risk for dementia and Alzheimer's. I think it's quite startling for us to learn that after a woman reaches age 60, her chance of developing Alzheimer's disease are twice as high as developing breast cancer. So that's quite startling. And in addition to that, we as women also face a much higher likelihood of death from Alzheimer's than do from diabetes, accident, influenza, pneumonia, and among other diseases after age 65. So as we get older, we become much more vulnerable to Alzheimer's. And you have also heard that women have a much higher lifetime risk of dementia, of Alzheimer's. And one thing in particular that is quite interesting, that is by the time that a woman is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the study has found that the woman tends to decline or progress faster than men who suffer from the same disease. So the question really is, next slide, please. Why does Alzheimer's disease affect more women than men? This is really the area that has attracted intense attention, and a lot of research have been devoted in this area. And I just want to share with you some few highlights based on some of the studies. And as Sarah mentioned, that the report that's been generated has a very comprehensive review summarizing the latest findings, the knowledge gap, and what you can do. So I do refer you for the detailed information by visiting the AARP website and get a copy of the report. So when it comes to men and women, there are many, many differences, obviously. But why do women have more Alzheimer's? And it's really a multifactorial question or causes. Next slide, please. The age has always been considered as one of the key factors in women who have higher Alzheimer's cases, notably because women live longer than men. In average, women live about 4 to 5 years longer than men. But the longevity itself really doesn't fully account for why 2/3 of women, why 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women. So there are many other factors, from the hormones to the genes to the lifestyle and many other socioeconomic factors that really compounding on our women that make us more prone to Alzheimer's, and also that tend to progress faster. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the genes. There are many genes right now that are being identified to have associated with Alzheimer's. One in particular is ApoE4 genes. We all have ApoE genes, one copy from our father and one copy from our mother. And there are 3 types of ApoE, so ApoE2, ApoE3, and ApoE4. And when you think about the combination, then altogether there are 6 possibilities in terms of the combination of your ApoE genes. So for those who carry ApoE4, do have a higher risk for Alzheimer's. But something is very interesting. The study found that women who carry a copy of the ApoE genes, not only that they have a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's compared to those who do not carry the ApoE genes, but when they compare women with men who also carry the ApoE genes, men tend to only have a slightly higher risk compared to the men who did not have the ApoE gene. So that if a woman who also carries a copy of ApoE genes, her risk is higher for dementia compared to the man who carries the ApoE genes. So that's very interesting from the genetic perspective that potentially explain why there might be more women Alzheimer's patients compared to men. And also that study found that women with ApoE gene are also more likely than men to have a worse memory performance during the examination. They tend to progress faster, and also they have a greater brain atrophy. So that having ApoE gene certainly pose risk, particularly for women. But I will address this later. Having the gene, although is a risk factor, but it's not determinant. And there are things you can do. There is one study finding that for women who carry ApoE genes, one group of women are very healthy medically, and the other group of women who have metabolic problems such as diabetes and hypertension. So that group of women with a lot of untreated, unstable medical condition tend to have a much higher risk for dementia. So that there are certain things you can do even if you carry the ApoE4 genes. And African American, in particular, have a gene variant known as ABCA that put them even at a higher risk for dementia. So that genes we inherited from our parents. We cannot make anything to change the genes, but there are things we can do. Next slide, please. The other thing is our brain. Sarah has touched upon a little bit earlier. So women's brain and men's brain are different, not just in terms of the size, but also the overall anatomy, the chemistry, the overall connectivity. And women are more prone to depression, anxiety, and stress. And we know that the depression, anxiety, and stress themselves are risk factors for dementia. In addition, that the key pathological hallmark for Alzheimer's, the neurofibrillary tangle, tend to spread faster and wider in women who suffer from MCI in their brain compared to men. And similarly, the amyloid plaque studies have shown that they are less likely to be cleared out from the women's brain than the man's brain. So from those perspectives, those findings give us some indication and offers the doors to study more as to if women actually would respond differently to treatment, or if they would progress at a different rate compared to their male counterpart. And we know that women perform better on language, on the verbal frequency, fluency testing. You know, on average, ladies speak about 3 times more words than men on any given day. So that's great. But at the same time, because they are better, they perform better on the verbal memory test, that tends to actually mask their symptoms. So by the time a woman is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the disease has already progressed later stage compared to the man. So that also tends to progress, women tend to progress faster. So that really calls for the research to study and to identify memory test and tool that will be more sensitive to women. Next slide, please. So hormones, obviously that one of the major difference between man and a woman is that we have the women hormones, so estrogens. Estrogen is believed to be neuroprotective. And during the course of, the entire women's life, the reproductive system during that period of time, that seemed to be a very important information. There are studies showing that there are association between the overall estrogen level and the dementia risk. So for women who have a longer reproductive period, so that means that they actually have their first menstrual period earlier, and then they have a later age for the menopause, and then they seem to have a less risk for dementia. And conversely, for women who have the later menarche, and also if they have the menopause before age 47 or even 45, they seem to carry a higher risk for dementia. Study have also found that women who have a history of the ovary removal as well as miscarriage tend to have a higher risk for dementia as well. There was an interesting study looking at the overall number of pregnancy a woman has in terms of the impact on the risk of dementia. So the study found that for women who have over 3 pregnancy, the risk is about 12% lower compared to those who only have 1 pregnancy. But interestingly, that when women have more than 5 pregnancy, the risk seems to have increased due to some other multiple factors as well. So we know that during the menopause, there have been many symptoms. There is a very sharp decline or fall of the estrogen level, which is linked to the potential risk of dementia. So there have been a lot of studies focusing on the use of the hormone replacement therapy, HRT. And our current understanding is that HRT is beneficial, but provided there are a few caveats, that is one, the timing. So the study suggested that the HRT should really be given at the onset of the menopause symptoms. That is when you start to develop hot flashes, insomnia, mood disorder, so on and so forth. That's a time to initiate the HRT, which not only provides the benefit of the menopause-related symptoms, but long-term wise, it seems also have to provide a benefit on reducing the dementia risk. As you may know that in a previous large study, it showed that using HRT actually has detrimental effect on women's cognition. But that was really looking at women who are older than 65, and then they started to use HRT long time after the menopause. So one of the key message is that the HRT should be started very early and onset of menopause rather than waiting for a long period of time. And ideally, it should be continuing for over 10 years based on one study in order to have the ongoing sustaining protective effect. Next slide, please. We have heard a lot about different risk factors, biological, social, so on and so forth. And Sarah has touched upon actually in quite a lot of detail. But what I want to really talk about here is those are what we consider as modifiable risk factors. So what does it mean? That means that you cannot change your genes. You cannot reverse your age. And there's also very little you can really do about your hormone level other than taking the HRT. However, there's so much you can do about all this. Studies have shown that women tend to exercise less compared to men, and you can get moving, you can get active. There are tremendous scientific evidence suggesting the cognitive benefit of physical exercise. Similarly, the lower education level is a major risk factor for dementia as well. But that can be modified, right? So that people now are being encouraged to learn more, to pursue secondary education, to pick up a new language, to pick up a hobby. Even just by being here today to learn more about women and brain health, I think that puts you in a better position and you are making an effort to reduce risk for dementia. Depression and stress are very common, and social isolation, particularly in the midst of the pandemic and COVID, is very prevalent. So that identifying depression and cope with depression, cope with stress are very important for you to manage, to be quite cognizant about. A poor eating habit. I saw one of the audience asked in terms of what kind of food we should be eating with an effort to reduce dementia risk, so that we can spend a little bit more time talking about that. But there are a lot of scientific evidence showing that the poor eating habit, high fat, high sugar diet, is part of the inflammatory process, and also that really puts you at a high risk for dementia. And there are many things you can do in terms of eating healthy, particularly food that is rich in antioxidant. Insomnia, we talked a little bit of that earlier on. It's very common, particularly among women who are in the menopause phase. Hot flashes, irritability, agitation, so on and so forth. And insomnia has been linked to increased risk of dementia. So that identify the insomnia and get into a much better sleep hygiene, and then sleep better is another way of reducing your risk for dementia. In addition, many other medical conditions, including the obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol, can all contribute to the high risk of dementia. So that check your blood pressure, get your weight under control, talk to your doctor. If you're on medication for diabetes, on medication for hypertension, make sure that you check them regularly, make sure that they actually have stabilized your medical condition. Laura will be talking about the caregiver burden, which is a very, very stressful process for many. And so here, the message is really, there's so much you can do that is within your control. Learn about it, learn how you can empower yourself by getting involved. AARP has a lot of information, great tips, scientific information as to what you can do. So I suggest you go on the website. Next slide, please. So we understand the science, and now it's really time to act. There are so many ways that we can get involved, empowering women, ensure inclusive research. I think it's particularly interesting. I'm a researcher. I have been involved in many, many clinical trials. And one of our experience has always been that it's very difficult to find minority participant, particularly minority female participant. For some of the trial that the percentage of the minority female participant is less than 2%, and yet, the disease affect about 15 to 20% in that population. And if we don't have the minority female participant in our clinical trial, it is very difficult for us to understand if they have the same way of responding to medication, if they have the same way of developing side effects. So that is critically important for us to really identify people, to empower minority women to get involved and to participate in clinical trial. My final slide, I want to show you that and AARP, the Global Council for Brain Health, in the last 5 years, we have made a lot of progress. There have been many, many reports that's been published, really addressing 6 key areas of brain health, from the physical exercise aspect to nutrition, to supplement, sleep, social isolation, so on and so forth. And for each report, there is also a very simplified infographic illustration of some of the key message as to what NARP that we advise people to do based on the current available scientific data and evidence. So in conclusion, we understand a lot from our scientific perspective on brain health, on dementia, on Alzheimer's. Women are at a higher risk, but there's so much more that women can do. So get moving, eat healthy, stay socially engaged, exercise not just your body, but your brain, and then reach out and join the fight, and so that we can make Alzheimer's a very distant memory in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zong. That is excellent, excellent information, and the consistent message of joining the fight. Thank you for that. And now our last but not least, of course, is Laura Eschker. And Laura's going to talk about another critical component of all this, and that's the caregiver. So Laura, and then we have your questions. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Laura, you're on.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everybody. So this will be just a drop in the bucket of wellness today, though we can appreciate how small efforts can resonate and ripple. This is just such a wonderful group of presenters, and just happy to be included here. So next slide, please. Thank you. So when I began my career about 25 years ago, the compassionate adage was, no one should do this alone. You can go to the next slide, thank you. And we've certainly come a long way, and yet we're not close. And as you've been listening, I know we're not close yet to a world where no caregiver loses their security, financial or otherwise, their health or well-being, while providing care for another. Next slide, please. Well, caregivers deserve to be well. We all deserve to be well. And it's my deep wish for dementia caregivers everywhere to have continuous opportunities for sustaining their own well-being and to be able to do so through affordable, reliable, tailorable practices in accessible and easy to return to spaces. And thankfully, I don't believe anyone disagrees on this vision. That's the good news, and it's possible, and it's beginning to happen. The hard news here, as we can see here from Atul Gawande, building off this perspective on enabling well-being. In dementia care, well-being is in the larger space of healing, not curing at this time. We don't have a cure in sight. And well-being is harder to foster when we're continually afraid and anxious and worried and uncertain. Thankfully, though, we can experience and benefit from healing without a cure. So next slide, please. This is a report. It's a National Healthy on Aging report. It happens consistently between U of M and the AARP. And this particular edition was focused specifically on dementia caregivers. It's an excellent resource. I encourage you to check it out. So it should be no surprise, 91% of dementia caregivers are thinking about their own future, primarily women here, and particularly those of us with a family history or with previous or current caregiving experience. We're concerned. We are part of the worried well. So next slide, please. It's a visceral response, all of this wonderful information and resources and development and progress, and yet our container is flawed. So even though our time together is quite limited, it feels imperative again, building off what Sarah and Kate have already shared, when discussing well-being, to call out briefly the very strong forces out of a caregiver's immediate control, which complicate their well-being and erode their health. Systems which are deeply flawed, healthcare and economic conditions, not to mention the sexism and disparities women continue to face. And this is important to well-being because women historically and presently internalize these factors as their fault, personally, as if they're doing something wrong in the midst of caregiving while working so hard to do everything right. And I'm confident that this resonates in some way with everyone here today, particularly women. So there can be deep shame and grief due to these factors, which are painful and damaging, and it complicates an already dizzying path for families. Women are suffering. So while advocacy continues, thankfully, for more compassionate policies, on the daily caregiving front, we focus on what is controllable, what is modifiable. And thankfully, there is quite a lot of preventable damage, treatment, and improvable in almost everyone. So next slide, please. This image is from the same report. And what we don't hear enough about are the rewards of caregiving. So both are true, the stress and the hardships, the rewards and the growth, including growth through trauma. And I do view caregiving as a kind of trauma. So 85% viewing care partnering and caregiving as rewarding. We don't hear enough. So next slide, please. It feels good, a better bucket, a new container, something we can manage, and it's not leaking, no Band-Aids. So caregivers are masters of coping with few resources, though they shouldn't have to. So as their lives are continually upended and reassembled through hardships and the many forms of grief sustained over time, it is still possible to be a healthy caregiver, to be well, to enjoy life, and to foster connections. And most importantly, the relationship they have to themselves, which is the foundation for the relationship to the person with dementia in their care. So healthy caregivers are able to build new containers for themselves over and over again. Next slide, please. And this is not a selfish act. Self-care is often, unfortunately, perceived as such. So just staying here on this slide, earlier I mentioned how I want to share just 3 healthy ways caregivers approach their well-being and 1 practice. So just pausing here for a moment to consider yourself during this pandemic, an overview of how you feel you're doing. without any judgment or criticism, and just the successes, the perceived failures, the ups and downs, the struggle, and a collective deep breath and acknowledgement. It's hard. And there's absolutely nothing linear about self-care. And self-care is really easy to dismiss when we're not attuned to the heroic effort and the energy it takes to be committed to ourselves, to the purpose of our well-being, to the permission we need to give ourselves to practice, and the persistence needed to return again and again, to be present. So these are why these words are here, worked out nicely as an alliteration. Purpose, presence, practice, persistence, please. So next slide. These are the foundations for the next practices here. These are the three things that healthy, present caregivers are doing. And the first, present care partners understand the complexity of their stressors. They know how to apply this knowledge for their health and well-being. So not as another reason to beat themselves up or to judge themselves more harshly. And number two, care partners know how and when to provide care for themselves. So often in small doses, many times throughout the day. So not what we do is as important as how. So are we going through the motions, or are we really there for it? Are we present? And three, present care partners are highly attuned to their partner and aware of their partner's needs as differentiated from their own. When we are enmeshed, we have a harder time seeing our own needs. We can't really see the other person, and we can't see ourselves as clearly either. So we can't see ourselves clearly or accept the other person for where they are. The distress and the needs can become a greater source of dis-ease and obstacles to care. So with greater compassion, we can see one another more clearly. And this is the beginning of where caregiving becomes a practice of well-being. Next slide, please. So how to do this? We have to stop, and recognizing how very hard it is to stop. We are so accustomed to wanting to control and manage so much, and yet stop is essential. We must. And stop is a practice, and also stop as an acronym. And so while I can explain this practice, I feel it's best shared always by a dementia expert, in this case, a family caregiver. This is Glenn. I've known Glenn for many years, and he very generously shared his own experience. I met him when his wife, Gail, was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease and became part of the Elderberry program, which is a program specifically for women at U of M who are diagnosed with a dementia. So this is Glenn sharing his experience with STOP.
Well, the biggest thing is trying to make sure that I find time to relax and get myself calm. When Gail was at home for the last 4 years, get myself calm. When Gail was at home for the last 4 years, she was constantly moving, so I had to take advantage of any time that there was some downtime, like if she was taking a nap or if she was attending Elderberry group or something like that. I had to make sure that I took that time and made myself calm, enjoy some downtime, so to speak. That's the main thing. That I actually have patience. I'm definitely always been a type A personality in business. I was always a problem solver, manager, coordinated activities for groups of up to 25, 30 people. So it was always direction and getting things done that need to be done. And with an Alzheimer's patient, you have to slow down. You can't fix things. You have to accept. You have to accept what's going on. It's tough. Always have a tendency to fall back on some of those old habits, but then I kind of stop and take a look at myself and say, okay, we can do it a different way. That was one of the things that in one of the training classes that we went through, the mindfulness training class, they had the concept of stop, S-T-O-P. Stop, take a breath, observe, and then proceed. So that one really struck home, because that helped me stop the overreaction that I was trying to do, and let me walk away from something that was bothering me, even if it was just to walk into a different room, take a minute, then I could come back and help her.
It's important to listen to the caregivers and their real experiences. It's so hard to stop. I think we can all appreciate that much more deeply now, having gone through this pandemic, still in it. So in clinical care and research and education, we tend to use the language of phases and stages of dementia and caregiving to help describe and plan for certain common experiences. In well-being, though, and in actuality, there are only moments. And we're much healthier when we learn to be there for more of our moments. And you can go through this slide, please, and we can move on to the next. So stopping, taking a breath, observing, neither pausing, putting aside, or proceeding. So this is here for you to consider. Next slide. So why stop? So you can look at these reasons here, but essentially, healthy, skillful decisions for our own care and for the person in our care begin with presence, by paying attention to where we actually are. And frequently, this ability to stop and pause right in the middle of difficulty, in the middle of a difficult moment or a frustrating care exchange. And we often think of wellness and well-being as being, outside of difficulty, somewhere pleasant and lovely and outside of our struggles, separate. But really, it's often right there, right in the pocket of our struggles, and we tend to miss it. And this is when we need it most. And thankfully, it's a practice we can build. And there's no one right way to do this, though there are very skillful ways to practice. And this is a part of caregiver brain health. So next slide, please. It's moment by moment. Well-being as a practice, staying present as a practice. It requires practice, as anything worthwhile does. But caregiving itself can be a practice of well-being and not separate. So caregivers deserve and need places where the practice of their well-being is the focus and where their wellness is the primary purpose of gathering and learning, in addition to and separate from the excellent support groups and education programming that exist. So next slide, please. We have this to offer. You are welcome to reach out to me. And due to time, we'll go right on to the next slide for the MADC Wellness Initiative. This is one way we're responding to this need. There are many offerings available and many ways to dip a toe in or jump in and jump out and to return again and again. And that's realistic. We need warm entrances and soft landings. There's nothing linear here. It's really more of a spiral and a firm commitment to ourselves as the most important and essential piece to well-being. How do we build caregiver resilience? And so I hope you'll join me for this, if not this month, in the new year. While it's beneficial to start early, it's never too late to begin again. I'm happy to answer your questions, and you can follow the links for more information, and feel free to reach out to me directly as well. I really appreciate being included today. So thank you for having me.
To share your expertise with our audience. And again, a particular shout out to Lisa Detton Cooper, who has led this initiative for the state of Michigan and done an incredible job in impacting so many lives. And with that, Lisa, you have some questions in the chat that you'd like to share with us?
Yes. Thank you, Paula, and thank you to all of our presenters. We're going to bring everybody back up on the screen here. And again, we have so many questions, such great information today. We'd like to try to go through and answer as many of them as possible, as quickly as possible. And our guests have graciously said that they will spend a little extra time with us. So even if we don't get to your question, we will go back into comments as you are typing things in the comments section and answer as many of the questions that we can't get to live as possible. But to start out, I saw we had a number of questions about diet and supplements. And thought we'd maybe start with Sarah on that. Sandy had a question, but several other people had a question about, are there foods that we should be eating, that we shouldn't be eating, things like that.
Great questions, and something I was telling Paula earlier, it's our most popular question and our most popular report on the Global Council on Brain Health's website. People want to know what they can do food-wise. And so we say that there are 3 pots: food to include and encourage and avoid, right? So leafy green vegetables, fabulous. Blueberries, colorful foods. Kate mentioned antioxidants, right? So the more colorful the food, those are great clues that they're helpful. And so the other major thing to include in your diet, fish. It's been tremendously helpful. We talked about having experts from all over the world come together on consensus about what works. And if you look at what these diets have in common, they all are recommending fish. And that's thought to be the omega-3 fatty acids in fish like salmon and mackerel, and to a little less degree tuna. But fish in your diet seems to be tremendously beneficial. Now, we all wish that we could just take a pill, right? And the supplements industry in the United States is going strong. And we did a survey when we did the Global Council's supplements report. And it turns out that 1/4 of all people 50 and older are taking a brain health supplement because they think if they pop the pill, it'll be good for them. Unfortunately, the Global Council does not recommend any dietary supplement for brain health. And that's really important because the evidence that we have is about food and its benefits to brain health, not supplements. Now, I'm not talking about if you go to the doctor and they say that you're deficient in a particular mineral or vitamin, by all means, take the vitamins. But for brain health, unless you have been found by your physician to be lacking, like the B vitamins, for example, taking a dietary supplement is going to do nothing but waste your money, honey. Unfortunately.
Thank you, Sarah. And that Karen's question there that we had too, and a number of others about food. Another area that we
I just jump in to add to that, to Sarah's point. I think there are also questions from people who are vegans or vegetarian who do not eat fish. So what do they do? Right? Because fish is such an important source of omega-3, and if they don't eat fish, how do they obtain omega-3? So there are many food sources from different nuts, peanuts, walnuts, flaxseed, and even dark green leafy vegetables do contain omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9. So that just because you don't eat fish doesn't mean that there are no other alternative sources for omega-3. I just want to bring that up.
trying to do mute and unmute because we're getting a lot of feedback here. But it's hard to remember. Moving on to another question, we had another series of questions, a lot of questions about clinical trials and how can we find out about clinical trials. A lot of folks here in Michigan asking about that, and I know Laura at U of M has some information for us to share.
Yes, I hope you will visit our website as a beginning step. There are so many studies to participate in. This is alzheimers.med.umich.edu. Just to give you just a quick overview: medication studies, memory training studies, neuroimaging,
and biomarker studies, as well as lifestyle intervention and caregiver studies. So caregivers out there too, we need your participation and input. So right now, during the pandemic, everything is largely online and remote. So these are great ways to begin. It's a statewide center, and we also have folks who live outside of Michigan who participate in our studies, and we're part of 32 NIH sites. So the Alzheimer's.org is another great pathway to look for clinical trials and to get started with your zip code and finding what works for you. So thank you for being interested in volunteering.
And as Laura mentioned, we'll have all those websites that we'll also share on our resource page after this is done. And Dr. Kate had more to add to this.
Just to add Laura's comment about access the information to clinical trial, there are a number of clinical trials right now being done nationwide, so you don't actually have to be in certain location. One of the studies I want to mention specifically is called APT Web Study, stands for Alzheimer's Prevention Trial Web Study. So this is an NIA-funded study. I think about 35 centers across the country now are involved, so that you can just go on the website to fill the questionnaire, and based on the result or your answer, then that you will be directed to the center near you. So it's a fantastic way of getting involved. It really doesn't matter in terms of your current condition by and large, and obviously that we are looking for people who are 50 years and older. So this is really a great effort in looking at how we can do different kind of clinical trial digitally, remotely, by screening people and by getting them involved.
Thank you. And I think Dr. Kate, we're having some audio issues just have arisen in the last couple of minutes. So hopefully we can get that taken care of there. Kind of moving on in questions is we've got so many that came in. We had quite a few questions that came up about menopause, and I don't know if we want to try to take any of them live. There were a couple of suggestions. I know Sarah had mentioned and recommended this book, which I'm going to hold up, and we're going to get more information for you on our website about this by Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who is also part of the rollout with Dr. Zong and Sarah Locke and the other folks. There is a whole section on the impacts of the brain, journey, pregnancy through menopause, so definitely worth a read here. And then I know Dr. Kate had also suggested that folks check out the North American Menopause Society, NAMS, which I did not know existed. That would have been good to know a few years ago there. Sarah wanted to share with us a little bit about our exercise. We talked about that a little bit during your presentation, Sarah.
I think you were asking me about exercise. The audio was a little challenging there, but here's the shorthand. 150 minutes a week of at least moderate aerobic activity is recommended. Along with that, staying active, not just the concentrated 30 minutes a day that we're talking about, but making sure that you get up, get moving through the day, walk whenever you can, staying active and taking those easy steps to get a little bit more exercise in your life, whether it's parking further away or taking the steps. Those can add up and make big differences. And there's encouragement, especially for women and osteoporosis issues. Make sure that you're doing some weightlifting twice a week. And those can be tremendously helpful to everybody, no matter your gender. I always say, if there's one thing that you can do, dance, because it's going to involve all of the great activities of exercise, social engagement, music, engaging your brain, being with others. So figure out how you can dance.
Thank you. You know, we also had another series of questions, a bunch of questions about genetic testing that I'm going to turn over to Dr. Zong. Things like, how do you know if you have this APOE gene, or should I get genetic testing done? Does it make sense?
It's a great question. We get that question a lot. So if you do decide to go to have the test done, so there are multiple ways. It could be as simple as easy as just go on 23andMe website. They will send you a kit, and you will just spit into that tube and send it over. A few weeks later, they will give you a report, and it's relatively inexpensive. So that this is potentially feasible for a lot of people who do not want to go to a lab or go to a clinic. So the other way of getting the test done is talking to a doctor, and who can order the EcoEgene and among others to do it. So logistically, it's relatively straightforward and feasible if you do decide to do it. However, I think it's a much bigger question as to should you do it. So right now, since we do not have a cure and we do not have a prevention strategy specifically in place, so I think it's very much of a personal choice if you're going to do it or not. By and large, we feel that for people who have a strong family history of Alzheimer's, the likelihood of them getting the genes is higher compared to those who do not have a family history. That if you want to identify yourself, if you have a higher risk or not, so you can plan better, then that might be one of the invitations for you to get the test done. So there are many social, ethical, and potentially even legal issues involved. So it's a very complex issue. At the end of the day, it's really becoming a personal decision.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Song. We continue to have some audio issues happening right now, so we'll try to clarify. We'll have the information available on our aarp.org/MI Dementia website resource page, and we'll try to answer some of the questions additionally in comments even after this program is done to help compensate for anything perhaps that folks may have missed. And then just one more question, and I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. I had a question I saw here from a person whose sister has a Parkinson's diagnosis and is concerned that this may become or progress to Alzheimer's and dementia. And it made me think that we should probably mention real briefly, perhaps Sarah, that there are many different types of dementia. I don't know if Sarah, if you want to address that.
Yeah, dementia describes a group of symptoms that neurodegenerative diseases can cause, affecting your activities of daily living. So that's the definition of dementia. But there are all kinds of dementias. Alzheimer's is the one that people are most familiar with and is thought to be most common. But vascular dementia, something that's related to your heart health and stroke and brain, vascular dementia almost always occurs in combination with other kinds of dementias. Parkinson's, you mentioned. Lewy bodies, my own dad had dementia with Lewy bodies. So there are multiple causes, and that's the great thing about the research that we've been talking about. We're finding out more and more. It's kind of like cancer. There is a group of diseases, but what can cause them and what affects them and what potential treatments there are will differ according to the kind of dementia that you have.
Thank you, Sarah. And we still have more questions, but I know we are over time. So I want to thank all of you for being here, for spending time with us, for being part of this really important discussion. And before we all leave here today, I want to challenge every person today who is watching this. Think of one thing that you can do. Dr. Zong had said there's so much that we can do. And think just for yourself, as a result of being on this discussion today, is there one thing that you can do? And let's commit to that, each of us, moving forward. So for more information after this is all done, I'm going to invite you all to come back here, and you can share this video again on Facebook. You can share it with friends. You can continue to put comments, and then I'm going to keep an eye with our guests and our producer on the questions and comments that come in, and we'll continue to try to answer as many of the questions as we can on Facebook in the comment chat. But Much of the information and much of the answers you will find on our website that we have put together that will house the presentations from today's session, as well as a recording of today's session and some of the other resources that we talked about, in particular the resources that Sarah mentioned from the Global Council on Brain Health. So thank you again for being with us, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and go forward in better health.